Hello and welcome to this video. My name is Dr. Lasker. I'm a consultant radiologist and thank you for coming to watch this video and welcome to my channel. So you're probably thinking to yourself, where on earth have I been for so long? And there's been TikTok, there's been Instagram, and there's been Twitter. And actually, most importantly, I started my very own podcast. So if you are interested in what it's like to be a medical person from my point of view, then why don't you have a look at my podcast? It's called Two Medics Podcast. You'll find on all the major providers. So anyway, moving on, I keep getting asked a particular question that I thought it's probably best I do a video on this sooner rather than later. People are asking me a lot about what it's like to be a radiologist, and I was really thinking about what I should really say, and it's going to have to be two videos. It's going to have to be two videos, I think. I don't think I've got the energy or the time to be able to do one long video about the pros and cons. So this video is going to be the pros. No, let's do the cons, because I'm the kind of person that if someone said to me, do you want the good news or the bad news? I would probably go for the bad news first, because yeah, that's just the way I like to operate. So let's go to the bad news. What are the top 5 things I hate about being a radiologist? So, or a radiology person in training, going through training, etc., etc. So one of the top things, it doesn't actually annoy me all that much, but it's being mistaken for being a radiographer. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with being a radiographer, but I'm not a radiographer, I don't take the scans. So what usually happens is someone says, so what do you do for a living? Like, that's the only thing that defines me as a person. But anyway, that's a longer conversation. But they say, what do you do? And I'd say, well, I'm a radiologist. And say, okay, all right, what does that mean? I say, oh, like I'm a doctor that specializes in medical imaging. They're like, oh, okay, so you take the pictures. Like, no, I do take some of the pictures. I take some of the ultrasounds, but I don't take the pictures. My job is actually to look at the pictures and interpret the images, and then say what's going on. And then the other person's like, oh, okay. And then what do you do next? So, well, I just write what's going on, and then I just send a report. And they're like, so you don't actually like treat people? Like, yeah. Well, there are some treatments I do. I do some steroid injections and like really easy drains, but yeah, most of my job is looking at pictures and telling other people what to do. So I guess the point is that people don't really, when you're watching ER and all those TV shows, you don't really imagine like, sitting in a room looking at screens the whole time and being that kind of doctor. Yes, I am a doctor's doctor, really. Patients don't really see me all that often, and when they do, they're actually generally quite pleased to see me. But generally speaking, a radiologist is a doctor's doctor. We're facilitating the entire patient journey. Now, in that is actually a really cool thing, I think, anyway, that you can have such an integral part onto the patient's journey. You can have such an integral part onto how to actually help a patient. So depending on what you say on that scan can completely change the outcome and the management of the patient. And all the doctors, all the teams, all the medical profession really do rely on what we say on that report. So it's a really, really important part of being a medical professional. But what I like about it, it's not in the limelight. It's not so much like everyone's going to clap my way in and pat me on the back on the way out. I go in, I go out, I do my job, and that's about it. Number 2 is kind of related to the first one, in that your doctor colleagues don't always take you so seriously, because at the end of the day, you're sitting at a desk having a coffee. Nice. And you're looking at pictures. You're not running around on the wards, you're not explaining to patients the good news, the bad news, you're not cutting people up and going in and fixing things. And so sometimes your colleagues can be a little bit condescending about who you are and what you do. And that can be a little bit annoying sometimes, like where they'd be like, oh, you know what, just go do the scan, what's the big problem? And I don't think people really appreciate some of the nuances of being a radiologist and how much pressure that can be when you've got lots of scans to go through and you're trying to do the best job you can. They don't really appreciate how difficult things can be, which also brings us on to the next point, which is the actual training is really, really tough. Clearly that must depend on where you're training, but in the UK anyway, and I know in Australia, and anyway, the training that I went through was really, really difficult. The exams are really, really tough. And can you imagine, look, radiologists are difficult people anyway. So now if you get a whole load of difficult people who are then going to make a difficult exam, they're not going to make it like a fun exam. They're going to make it the most difficult exam possible because they're difficult people in the first place, if that makes any sense. But anyway, the exams are really, really tough. So you've got these exams and they ask the most like weird things that don't really matter to the imaging. Like for example, we did a physics exam and it's not like real physics like you do at uni or even at A-levels, right? When you do physics, like real physics, you're learning how to work your way through a mathematical, physics problem, okay? But with our physics exam, it was more like, okay, memorize a few facts, we'll change, and then we'll just get you to regurgitate those facts. And it just didn't make any sense. And in truth, I don't remember any of my physics because it has no relation to what I do in my long-term practice. The next thing is that radiologists never really get to switch off when you're working. It's actually something that I didn't appreciate until I started to do the night shifts and the long shifts. So when I was the junior doctor running around the wards and I used to, do more sort of procedural things and just talk to people, you didn't have to always be switched on, like you could kind of be there but not be there, you know what I mean? Like you could just run around, do the blood test and be thinking about dinner and what you're going to order and all that kind of thing. But in radiology, you can't really switch off because like if you kind of switch off for a second and you miss something on that scan, that can have absolutely detrimental effects to the patient's journey. So it's very, very important that you don't switch off, that every single scan that you're giving it your 100%. And so you end up having sort of a checklist of things to go through. But by having that checklist, it can be difficult because you're not entirely sure, where you are on the checklist sometimes. Sometimes you forget things, sometimes you don't forget things. And the problem is when you do forget things or you may not forget things, like it can have a really bad effect on the entire situation with the patient. So, even in the middle of the night, you're really switched on. And the best way I can describe it is, let's say you're on a night shift, right? You're getting woken up and someone says, hey, can you do the Sudoku puzzle? And you think, yeah, I'll do your Sudoku puzzle. And in the beginning, it's all right. Like you've barely fallen asleep. But as time goes on and you're getting more and more tired, that Sudoku puzzle may be simple, but it starts to get more difficult. And you start to feel like, I just don't feel like doing Sudoku anymore. This is getting kind of tiring. Can we stop doing Sudoku? And my point is, like, imagine the human body being like a very, very complicated Sudoku puzzle. It's complicated. So imagine waking up with very little sleep, trying to go through a very, very complicated image or scan, and then knowing that outcome could have a massive, massive effect on what happens with that patient. So that's something which will also bring us to the next subject, which is dealing with mistakes, dealing with discrepancies. Now, everyone makes mistakes, depending, it doesn't matter who you are, right? But the thing about radiology mistakes is that the scan is done at this point, and then 2 years later, that little tiny lung nodule that you may not have seen may have kept growing and growing and growing, become something a lot more sinister, something to worry about. And so what will happen is that if that person comes in and has a scan and it turns out that tiny nodule from years ago was the nodule that became something more sinister, then that becomes a discrepancy on you. And that can be really stressful, right? Because, there's so many things to look at. You could blink and miss these tiny little things. This is not a game of where's Wally. In this situation, you may be deemed as being the Wally for missing that tiny little nodule in the first place. So that can be really difficult to deal with because by all means, you may be a very, very competent doctor, radiologist, but when you do get hit with a discrepancy, which will undoubtedly happen in anyone's practice, it can be very, very difficult to reflect and try and take the learning points without having that imposter syndrome come into your mind and tell you, you know what, mate, maybe you're not good enough for this job and you should think about doing something else. Anyway, so those are my top 5 reasons why I hate radiology. And I will soon make like a top 5, I could probably do even more than that, reasons why I love radiology. Everyone should do radiology. If you're not doing radiology, I have no idea why. So yeah, look into it, man. If you're thinking about it, hit me up, find me on social media. Yeah, radiology is just awesome. Anyway, thank you for watching this video. Do subscribe to my channel. I will be coming onto YouTube more often since I have managed to figure out a way to manage my time better, I think. Let's see how it goes. Anyway, thank you for watching.